The Langford family's annual board meeting was an event. All polished shoes, sharp suits, and polite power plays, held on the top floor of Galloway Technologies headquarters. 5 years earlier, Imara Kato had stood in that same room with a fresh MBA folded under her arm and watched Charles Galloway tear up her job application. Today she returned not as the niece who had been refused, but as the representative of Kane Industries, a company many in the room thought they knew nothing about. From her seat near the back, Imara watched her cousin Darren click through a PowerPoint, his voice smooth and practiced. "Quarterly numbers look excellent," he said. "Thanks mostly to our largest client, Kane Industries." Imara hid a small smile behind a porcelain coffee cup. Memories of Darren's laughter from that old interview flashed through her mind. "Imara, did you really think you were qualified? Leave real business to the family." She inhaled calm and looked down at her tablet where her team's real numbers glowed. She had spent 5 years building Kane Industries into a company that paid Galloway nearly $50 million a year, and they did not know she was the one behind it. Darren's confident smile widened as if he had won something, while Charles nodded as if approval were part of his posture. "Excellent work, Darren. Family keeps things running smoothly," Charles declared, patting his son's hand. The phrase landed in Imara's ears the way a challenge does, a dare to prove them wrong. Ms. Ortiz, Charles's assistant, tapped Imara's sleeve. "The board is ready for your presentation," she whispered, eyes flicking toward the head of the table. Imara stood, smoothing the lapel of her tailored suit, a world away from the modest dress she had worn to that humiliating interview. As she walked to the podium, Darren's voice cut through the room like a blade. "What are you doing here? This is a closed meeting." The words were a mixture of surprise and sharpened entitlement. Imara turned, the room noticing her for the first time. "I'm here representing Kane Industries," she said, letting the name hang in the air. A quiet, confused ripple passed through the boardroom. Nobody moved. Nobody expected her, and that exact lack of expectation was part of the plan. Darren's jaw dropped so quickly Imara almost missed the small, smug grin that had been there minutes before. Leah, Darren's sister, dropped her pen. "Impossible," she whispered. Charles leaned forward, his face darkening. "You run a small consulting firm," he said, the old dismissal shaping his words like a weapon. Imara tapped a remote and the screen behind her came alive with the first slide. Kane Industries, 5 years of audited growth. The presentation was clean and precise. Revenues, market penetration, offices in 12 countries. The client list read like a who's who of Fortune companies. "We did a background check when you applied here," Charles said, as if background checks revealed absolute truth. Imara smiled without warmth. "That consulting outfit was a front for what I was building. Kane Industries is the real company." The room filled with the soft sounds of inhaled breaths. Darren tried to interrupt, but Imara kept talking. "While you were congratulating yourselves for keeping me out, I was building the business you now rely on." "You can't be serious," Darren said aloud, voice brittle. "We would have known." Imara raised an eyebrow. "The same way you thought you could hide $8 million with creative accounting?" The look on his face drained color from his cheeks. Around the table, directors leaned toward one another and began sharp, low conversations. Imara's team had provided the numbers to the board, the evidence of creative accounting, hidden debts, and inflated client metrics sat in clear columns where anyone could read them. "I spent 5 years placing people inside your company, gathering data, building a case," she continued. "Kane Industries has been your largest client for 3 years running. 47% of your revenue comes from us." The room reacted like an animal startled, a chorus of questions, murmurs, a lawyer whispering urgently to his client. "Why are you here now?" Charles asked, voice tight. Imara clicked to the next slide. "Because it's time to renegotiate our partnership. And because, after reviewing your actual performance, I'm not sure Galloway Technologies is worth saving." "If you want to talk business, we'll talk business," Darren protested. "But this..." He gestured wildly at the screen, his anger thin and public. "You can't just walk away." "I'm not walking away," Imara said evenly. "I'm presenting options." She produced a calm dossier and set it on the podium like a gavel. Her voice did not shake. Tomorrow our contracts renew. You have been operating on borrowed time and borrowed numbers. Either you accept a restructuring that removes faulty leadership and stabilizes the company, or we cancel our contracts and let the market decide how much Galloway is worth without us. The lawyers began to whisper, to pivot their pens and faces toward the nearest exits. A board member cleared his throat. "This is extreme," he said, but the word had lost weight in the room. Imara's presentation had not been rhetorical, it was forensic. Charts and emails and invoices made a map of Galloway's dependence on Kane Industries. The truth, when placed in neat rows, has a way of closing debate. Revenge. Darren spat, voice high with humiliation. "This is personal." Imara's eyes softened for a fraction, remembering the rejection letter folded into a drawer 5 years earlier, the way she'd stared at the sentences that dismissed her. "This is business," she replied. "You taught me to be ruthless. I learned. I built." She watched Charles struggle between family instinct and corporate survival. "We will call an emergency meeting tomorrow morning," she said. "My auditors will present a full audit of your books. Be prepared." A flurry of phones lit up, messages winging across the room. The family camp fired off texts to relatives, the old scripts of shame and defense reviving. Imara ignored them and walked out of the room in that composed way she'd learned when things had to be controlled. At the elevator, Noah, her assistant, caught up to her. "Everything ready?" he asked. His voice carried the calm confidence that had been part of the operation for months. "Full audit, evidence of creative accounting, termination drafts," Imara answered. Noah smiled. "They won't know what hit them." Imara tucked that satisfaction away. She had bigger aims than humiliation. She wanted the company fixed. She wanted the family stopped from hiding corruption behind a shared name. The next morning Imara arrived at Galloway Technologies early. The lobby guard who had once been ordered to escort her out did a double-take as she passed. "Miss Kato," he stammered, struggling between protocol and embarrassment. "Ms. Reed," he corrected himself, then trailed off. She let him splutter and moved on. The boardroom filled with a tense, brittle air that smelled like fear and too strong coffee. Charles sat at the head of the table, but his posture was not the same as before. Darren was pale, his lawyer's presence a thin buffer. Independent directors clustered as if forming an island in a storm. Imara's team filed in behind her carrying thick binders full of data. She'd spent 5 years planting allies, pulling threads, and waiting for the moment when all the evidence lined up. "Good morning," she said, taking the podium with a small, steady nod. "Shall we begin?" Charles tried a private plea. "Perhaps we could speak first, privately." Imara's smile was brief, and she shook her head. "We've had enough private family discussions." The sound of papers passing around the table was a weapon in itself. As the board members read, cheeks shifted, eyes widened. "This is impossible," someone murmured. "These numbers can't be right." Imara didn't defend the numbers with rhetoric. She let the slides speak. Invoices dated and signed, emails requesting payment, ledger entries that linked Galloway's cash flow directly to Kane Industries. "Let's start with the $8 million in losses you labeled as operational expenses," she said, calling Darren out by name. He rose to protest, then sat again as legal counsel intervened. Imara watched him struggle to find calm. "Or perhaps we begin with the inflated client numbers," she suggested. The lawyer's attempts to cut her off fell flat when she produced copies of signed contracts. The room moved from denial to calculations. "Without Kane," she said plainly, "this company is insolvent." The word landed like a brick. It was not an accusation of betrayal. It was a factual conclusion drawn from columns of numbers. "You're trying to destroy your family," Darren managed, voice near-breaking. Imara folded her hands on the podium and answered with an old memory instead of anger. "Family, like the day you told the industry I wasn't qualified to work here," she said. The room fell silent. She could see the faces of people who had laughed at her 5 years ago flashing by in her mind, those smug smiles and dismissive gestures. "I was not asking to be given a title," she continued. "I built a business on merit, not nepotism." That sentence landed not as a blow, but as a challenge. Charles, flustered, sputtered that this was an act of treachery. "You built this while we were protecting the family legacy," Charles said, trying desperately to shape the moment into something personal. Imara's reply was quiet and cold. Then perhaps protecting the legacy should include protecting honesty. She clicked another slide, and the room watched as board members' faces changed color at the implications. The auditor's red lines and notes were not a private vendetta, they were a professional statement. As questions multiplied, Imara handled each one with calm competence. "How long have you known?" a director asked. "Long enough to document it," she said. "You have 1 hour to present a plan." "I brought 2 options." She set an envelope on the table and slid it across like a formal ultimatum. Option 1. Full restructuring. Darren steps down, the board appoints independent leadership, and Galloway scales down its dependence while preserving some relationship with Kane. Option 2. Immediate contract termination, regulatory notification about the accounting irregularities, and full legal action. The silence that followed was like a held breath. Lawyers whispered, phones lit up, and family members' texts poured in with accusations of disloyalty. Leah's hand trembled as she covered her mouth. The feud had been private before, now it was public and it required formal responses, not family apologies. Imara watched the lines on the faces around her and felt neither glee nor cruelty, only a steady resolve. This was business, and business required choices. "You can't force us," Darren said weakly. "This is our company." "Actually," Imara replied, "after you lose the revenue from Kane, there won't be much left to call a company." She met Charles's gaze. "You were right about one thing 5 years ago. I wasn't fit for your company." Her voice held no malice, but a clear finality. "I wasn't meant to work for Galloway Technologies. I was meant to lead businesses that don't hide debt under names and smiles." A senior director cleared his throat and said the inevitable. "The board must discuss leadership shifts." That phrase sent Darren into a small, desperate hysteria. "This is our family," he cried. The phrase echoed in the room like a broken record. Imara answered with a small, measured laugh. "It's a company. Families don't balance ledgers. Companies do." The distinction stung, and the room knew it. Behind the audience of lawyers and numbers stood the old family stories that had kept certain men in power. Imara's presence unraveled those stories into spreadsheets that had no sentiment. Within an hour, the atmosphere thickened with the machinery of corporate survival, emergency calls, legal teams conferring, independent directors whispering counsel. Charles tried to bargain, pointing at tradition and the family name as if old stories were a shield. "You will be sued," he threatened, the threat more about saving face than winning in court. Imara folded her hands. "On what grounds?" she asked. "That your family refuses to confront fraud? My lawyers will be happy to depose Darren." Faces turned, and the room felt suddenly wooden with careful calculation. The idea of a public deposition sent ripples through the executive circle. Leah looked away, ashamed. Darren's shoulders hunched, as if the weight of discovery pressed physically against him. Imara had expected this. The legal avenues would sting Galloway, but the audit was thorough, and the contracts explicit. This was no smear, this was proof. The difference mattered. Proof is what takes a furious accusation and turns it into a corporate action. As noon became afternoon, the boardroom transformed into a quiet battlefield of negotiation. Papers moved like chess pieces on the long table. Imara watched as long-held alliances shifted toward the pragmatism of survival. The independent directors, once aloof, now whispered about restructuring plans, about preserving value, about avoiding regulatory calamity. Charles, who once occupied the room as if he were carved into the wood, sat back and listened as his authority frayed in the face of numbers. "We must protect shareholders," said one director, the shareholders' language overriding familial ties. Imara felt a hollow satisfaction she could not deny. She had not come for petty revenge. She had come to change the company's direction, to stop corruption, and to show that merit and accountability mattered. Still, Watching Darren's face collapse into lines of panic offered a human shard of the drama, not because she enjoyed it, but because it showed the real consequence of arrogance and hiding truth. When the formal vote started, Imara watched as Galloway's fate tilted with predictable predictability. Independence and transparency began to win over the old club of family protectors. The board convened subcommittees, set timelines, and tasked independent auditors with oversight. Darren, pale and narrow-eyed, realized rapidly that the old advantages were gone. "This is a hostile takeover," he kept repeating. "No," Imara corrected quietly. "This is corporate governance." She presented the restructuring plan in detail: leadership shakeups, a phased rollback of family-exclusive contracts, new compliance mechanisms, and an oversight committee where Kane Industries would have a nominal seat to monitor the transition. "We're not trying to destroy your legacy," she said. "We're trying to preserve what's worth saving." Charles, forced into a smaller role, moved like a man learning the rules of a game he once knew by heart. The irony was a scorched thing inside Imara. The family had always spoken of legacy, but had used it to hide mistakes. Now legacy would be redefined around transparency. That redefinition would not be gentle. By-sunset deals were made in the sterile light of corporate negotiation. Darren tendered his resignation under pressure. Charles announced a phased retirement that saved some dignity, but stripped away hands-on authority. The board agreed to a restructuring plan that would bring in independent leadership and create a path for Galloway to rebuild its reputation. In the end, the family name survived in the paper sense, but control and stewardship moved toward accountability. Imara sat in an office that had once been denied to her and watched as movers carried boxes out of other people's lives. Her assistant uncorked champagne with a small flourish and set 2 glasses on the desk. "Congratulations," Noah said. His tone held something like pride. Imara lifted her glass and looked down at the printed rejection letter that she had taped to a corner of her new desk that morning, a quiet reminder. She typed one short message into the family group chat and paused before sending. "Don't worry about the name. I'll take care of it." Then she watched the city lights come alive and felt the slow, steady hum of a company that had been refocused. After the contracts were signed, silence filled the building. Darren walked past her without looking up, escorted by security, a courtesy removal disguised as protocol. Charles followed minutes later, shoulders slumped under the invisible weight of pride and loss. Imara stood by the glass wall watching them leave, her reflection merging with the city's skyline. "They'll never forgive you," Noah said quietly, breaking the silence. "I don't need forgiveness," she replied. "I need accountability." She turned from the window and looked around the office that had once been a dream, now a conquered reality. The scent of fresh leather and new authority filled the air. The desk in front of her bore no trace of the old regime, no framed family portraits, no gilded awards for self-praise. Only clean surfaces and plans for what came next. That evening, Imara sat alone with the city lights blinking below. Her phone buzzed with a dozen new messages, her mother, cousins, even an old friend from college. "You've gone too far. You humiliated them in public. This will tear the family apart." She read them all, and then placed the phone face down. "If integrity tears us apart, maybe we were never whole," she murmured. A knock on the door startled her. It was Noah again, holding a folder. "Press requests are already coming in," he said. "Everyone wants a quote." Imara smiled faintly. "Then give them one. Leadership isn't inherited. It's earned." The following week, the media swarmed Galloway Technologies. Business papers ran headlines like "The Rejected Niece Who Saved the Company" and "Kane Industries' Hidden CEO Revealed." Imara ignored most of them. She spent her days restructuring departments, replacing executives who had grown too comfortable with deceit, and reinstating those who had been overlooked. "We don't rebuild by firing everyone," she told the new leadership team. "We rebuild by setting a standard and holding everyone, including me, to it." Her words were firm, but her tone invited cooperation. Many who had feared her now began to respect her. They saw competence, not vengeance. Darren's financial misconduct soon made headlines of its own. The SEC investigation confirmed the fraudulent accounting, and charges loomed. One afternoon, Leah showed up at Imara's office, eyes red. You don't have to ruin him completely, she pleaded. Imara sighed. He ruined himself. I'm just not hiding it. Leah looked down. He's still family. So am I, Imara replied softly. The conversation hung in the air like smoke, painful but necessary. As Leah left, Imara stared out the window, thinking not of punishment, but of prevention. She knew too well how corruption began with silence. By month's end, Galloway Technologies had changed. The board operated with transparency. External auditors oversaw every report. Imara implemented mentorship programs for young professionals, especially women, who, like her younger self, had been told they didn't belong in boardrooms. If they won't give you a seat, she told a group of interns one afternoon, build your own table. The phrase spread quickly through the company. It wasn't a slogan, it was a memory-turned lesson. Her mother called one night. Imara, she began gently, Charles says you've destroyed the family. Imara smiled sadly. I didn't destroy it, Mama. I cleaned it. There was a long pause. He was cruel to you, her mother admitted, but he's still your uncle. And I'm still his niece, Imara replied. But we all answer to truth, not titles. Her mother exhaled heavily. You sound like your father. That, Imara thought, was the highest compliment she could have received. Weeks turned to months, and the transition became smoother. Profit margins stabilized under the new structure, and investors who had once wavered returned with cautious optimism. One afternoon, during a press conference, a reporter asked bluntly, Ms. Kato, do you see your actions as revenge? Imara met the camera lens squarely. If justice feels like revenge, maybe the problem isn't with justice. The room went quiet before breaking into applause. She walked away from the podium feeling lighter than she had in years. In private, though, moments of quiet reflection found her. Late at night, she would sit by her office window, replaying the early days, her uncle's dismissive tone, Darren's laughter, the sting of that torn job application. She no longer felt rage, only distance. Success had replaced anger with clarity. She realized now that the rejection had been the catalyst she needed. They tried to bury me, she said one night to Noah, but they forgot I was a seed. The next board meeting was different. No pomp, no self-congratulation, just clear discussions and shared accountability. Charles attended remotely, his tone cautious but respectful. You've done well, he admitted reluctantly. Better than any of us expected. That's because you underestimated me, Imara replied. There was no bitterness in her voice, only truth. For the first time, Charles smiled faintly. Maybe that's what this family needed, he said, before the call ended. Imara leaned back, letting out a slow breath. The victory felt complete, not loud, but enduring. Months later, Kane Industries and Galloway Technologies merged into a joint innovation venture, one focused on ethical technology and inclusive leadership. The merger made headlines worldwide. During the signing ceremony, Imara stood before cameras beside the new board chair, a woman in her 50s who had once been denied promotion under the old system. Progress, Imara said during her speech, isn't measured by the power you inherit, but by the integrity you build. The audience rose in applause. Somewhere in that crowd, Imara saw her mother wiping tears. After the ceremony, Noah approached with a grin. You realize you've just outdone every corporate comeback story ever written? Imara laughed. I didn't come back. I built forward. They clinked glasses of champagne, the bubbles rising like the years she had waited for this day. What now? He asked. Now we mentor the next generation, she said. So no one else has to prove their worth through pain. In the months that followed, Imara's name appeared on magazine covers and business panels. She was praised as a visionary leader who turned betrayal into blueprint. Yet she never forgot the letter still pinned to her office wall. You lack the qualifications and business acumen necessary. It was her reminder that every dismissal could become direction if met with discipline. Visitors often asked why she kept it there. Because it's proof, she'd answer, that rejection is just misplaced recognition. When Darren's trial concluded, Imara attended quietly, sitting in the last row of the courtroom. He looked older, defeated. As he left, their eyes met briefly. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," he said under his breath. "Neither did I," she replied. There was no anger left, only a quiet sadness. Sometimes justice looked like loss, even for the victor. Years later, Galloway Technologies, now renamed Kato Galloway Group, became a global model of integrity and inclusive governance. Imara, standing at a leadership summit, told her story to a crowd of young entrepreneurs. "I was told I wasn't qualified," she said. "So, I built something that required my own qualifications." Laughter and applause filled the hall, but what touched her most was seeing young women in the audience taking notes, their eyes alight with possibility. That evening, back in her office, Imara poured herself a quiet glass of wine and looked out over the city that had once felt unreachable. She remembered the girl who had walked out of this building years ago in tears, and she smiled at the woman who had returned not for revenge, but for redemption. "Sometimes," she whispered, "success isn't about proving them wrong. It's about proving yourself right." The skyline shimmered in gold and silver reflections as she raised her glass, not to victory, but to beginnings. If you value stories of respect, dignity, and justice, please subscribe. It means more than you know, and it lets me keep sharing the lessons life has carved into me.